That chilly autumn night, the darkness crept in earlier than usual. Jake was stretched out on his bed, scrolling through goofy internet videos, the kind every teenager seemed hooked on these days. He figured it was about time to call it a night when a sudden commotion erupted from the henhouse. The panicked squawking sent a jolt through him. It was unmistakable. Now, Pa was over at Uncle Roy's place in the next county, lending a hand, so the responsibility of keeping things under control fell squarely on Jake. Mama was working her late-night shift, but he could hear his little sister in the next room, belting out some butchered version of a Korean song she'd picked up online. Jake sighed, tossed on his worn-out Carhartt jacket, grabbed his headlamp, a trusty old axe, and, because he never went anywhere without one, a snack. With that, he headed out toward the henhouse. Jake didn't have anything against chickens, but these particular birds were a nightmare, mean as sin, with tempers to match. The only creatures nastier in the area were the neighbor lady and her equally ferocious Pomeranian. Honestly, Jake wouldn't have been surprised if the chickens had just as many assault charges as she did. But as soon as he stepped outside, he noticed something strange. The henhouse, which had been in complete chaos moments ago, was now eerily quiet. Too quiet. He figured it was probably just a fox stirring up trouble. Little critters were always scaring the birds. That is, until he spotted the blood. The entire side of the henhouse had been ripped clean off. Jake's stomach churned as he took in the damage. It wasn't foxes. It wasn't even a black bear. No way. The destruction was too severe for that. He considered the possibility of a brown bear wandering down from the mountains, but something didn't add up. Some of the wooden planks looked like they'd been pulled apart, not clawed or smashed, but pried off, with the nails bent as though wrenched free by something with hands. Hands. Jake's mind raced. What could have hands strong enough to rip apart a solidly built henhouse, something he took personal pride in constructing? A silverback gorilla that somehow crossed the ocean and trekked halfway across the country. Or maybe Bigfoot had finally grown tired of Washington state and decided to head east for a change of scenery. A loud squawk echoed from the nearby tree line, pulling Jake from his thoughts. His headlamp swept the area, landing on streaks of blood and a trail of feathers. Too much blood. Far too much. The chickens were gone, save for the one lone survivor clucking nervously in the woods. Against every ounce of common sense and survival instinct, Jake felt compelled to investigate. Keeping his steps as quiet as he could, he crouched low and moved toward the trees. His headlamp cast a pale glow that danced across the towering pines, their branches swaying in the wind as though the forest itself were waking from a deep slumber. He followed the trail, though the signs were fading, less blood, fewer feathers, just an occasional snapped branch. Here and there, coarse gray fur clung to the bark, unsettlingly out of place. Then Jake spotted something that made his stomach drop, a muddy patch in the dirt, with an imprint too large and too human-like to dismiss. It was a hand. Not just any hand. It was longer than his size 12 work boot and easily 3 times as wide. Jake's pulse quickened as he realized how far he'd wandered from the house. The warm glow of the porch lights was now just a faint memory. He decided it was time to turn back. But before he could take a step, a sharp snap rang out from the darkness, followed by a sound so blood-curdling it made his skin crawl. It was like a boar's grunt, twisted with the scream of a dying woman. Every hair on Jake's body stood on end. He bolted. Branches clawed at him as he ran, his heart pounding in his ears. Behind him, the earth seemed to erupt. Trees cracked and toppled, dirt and debris hurtled through the air, pelting his back as whatever was chasing him closed in. The unearthly scream reverberated through the woods, a primal, gut-wrenching wail that spurred Jake's legs to move faster than they ever had before. He stumbled down a narrow switchback, barely keeping his footing as a branch whipped across his face, splitting the skin just above his brow. Blood streamed into his eye, blurring his vision, but he kept going, fueled by sheer terror. Then he spotted it, a rusted, overgrown van he recognized instantly. Relief and dread mixed in his chest. At least now he knew where he was. But the real question was whether he could make it back alive. Ahead of me lay the edge of a cliff, a steep drop plunging into an old quarry that had filled with water over the years, forming a deep, dark lake. If I was going to shake off whatever was chasing me, that would have to be the place. My friends and I used to come out here all the time during summer to swim and do the kind of dumb things teenagers do. We always joked about jumping from the top of the cliff, though none of us ever got up the nerve to take the leap. The drop was over 130 feet, and while the water below was plenty deep, it felt like staring into the jaws of death. But now, I didn't have a choice. With my target clear, fear gave way to determination. My legs burned, and my chest ached as adrenaline surged through me like fire. Pushing harder than I thought possible, I rounded a bend in the trail, and behind me came another ear-splitting scream, a horrible mix of rage and agony. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear trees shattering as if their massive trunks were nothing more than toothpicks. The clearing was right ahead. Beyond it, the cliff and the endless void below. I didn't stop to think. I just ran straight for the edge and leapt into the abyss. For a fleeting moment, I felt the strange sensation of weightlessness, but it was shattered when something massive slammed into my back. Pain shot through me as I felt a crushing grip, rough and jagged, lock around my torso. Looking down, my headlamp illuminated a grotesque hand, misshapen, covered in patches of raw, blistered flesh and jagged, exposed bone. Whatever was chasing me had caught up, and now it twisted me around to face it. In my panic, I'd forgotten I was still clutching the axe I'd grabbed from home. Fueled by terror and pure survival instinct, I swung it with everything I had. The blade connected with its face, which was like a monstrous fusion of bloodied sinew and the warped skull of an elk. My headlamp caught the glint of sharp, uneven antlers dripping with gore. The creature let out a deafening howl, a cacophony of voices that sounded like a damned choir screaming in torment. As the axe buried itself in its grotesque head, it released me, clutching at its face with multiple hands. Suddenly, I was falling again. Shock and terror overwhelmed me, and for a moment, I didn't even realize I was plummeting toward the lake. Then instinct kicked in, and I forced myself to straighten my legs, cross my arms, and pray to whatever higher power might be listening. The impact hit like a train. The freezing water enveloped me, forcing every ounce of air from my lungs. For a brief second, the darkness turned to blinding white as pain shot through me. I kicked toward what I hoped was the surface, but the headlamp had been torn from my head, leaving me to grope blindly in the icy depths. Just when I thought my lungs would give out, my head broke through the surface, and I gasped for air, coughing and sputtering. I swam toward what I guessed was the shoreline. My legs and arms felt like lead, but I pushed forward, one stroke at a time. When I finally dragged myself onto solid ground, I staggered forward, only to trip over something and collapse into a pile of wet, slimy muck. The stench hit me first, a putrid mix of decay and rot that turned my stomach. As I scrambled back, the clouds parted just enough to let in a sliver of moonlight, and I saw it. A carcass. Or at least, what was left of one. The body had been stripped of its head, limbs, and skin, leaving behind a grotesque, unrecognizable mass. My eyes darted around, and I realized there were more. 6 or 7, maybe more, scattered across the clearing. Mangled camouflage tents and broken hunting rifles lay in disarray. Judging by the gear, they were poachers, probably a group that had been working the area illegally for years. But now, they were nothing more than shredded meat. My stomach churned, and I had to fight the urge to throw up. I forced myself to look away. There wasn't time to process the horror or even to feel fear. I just had to keep moving. I stumbled onto an old gravel path leading back toward the main road. My adrenaline was wearing off now, and exhaustion hit me like a brick wall. My entire body ached, and my legs felt like they could give out at any second. But I thought of my little sister waiting back at home, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding out here. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to keep going. The woods around me were a suffocating, oppressive black. The moon slipped behind the clouds again, swallowing what little light remained. I had to feel my way along the gravel path, relying on the crunch of stones under my boots to guide me. When I felt steady enough, I broke into a jog, each step driven by the desperate need to escape these cursed woods. I had to get home. My little sister was probably still awake, belting out her favorite K-pop songs at the top of her lungs, completely clueless that her singing might as well be ringing the dinner bell for whatever the hell that thing was. For 20 agonizing minutes, I kept running. 3 miles of relentless darkness and the singular thought of getting back to the house drove me forward. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and my legs were screaming with every step. The gash above my eye had finally stopped bleeding, though it left one side of my face streaked with dried blood, looking like some kind of macabre war paint. I wasn't sure if my clothes were soaked from the earlier swim, my sweat, or the pouring rain that had started coming down like a biblical flood. Either way, I was drenched to the bone. When I crested the berm, I could see the lights of the town glowing in the distance. The sight should have brought relief, but instead, it just made me uneasy. The streets were probably deserted at this hour, and maybe that was for the best, fewer potential victims. Then again, most folks around here were armed to the teeth. Not that it had done a damn bit of good for the poor bastards back at the lake. The closest building was a small diner just on the edge of town. I'd stopped in there a handful of times after school when I had a little cash to spare. The owner, Heidi, was one of the kindest souls I knew, always quick with a smile and a slice of pie for someone down on their luck. Maybe I could find a phone there and call the sheriff. I made my way down the hill, toward the familiar glow of civilization. But as I got closer, the small comfort I'd felt was ripped away. The front doors of the diner had been torn clean off their hinges, as though a semi-truck had plowed through them. I stopped in my tracks, straining to hear through the rain pounding all around me. My heart was still hammering from the run, making it hard to focus. An old station wagon sat parked out front. It was definitely Heidi's car. My stomach turned. Was she still inside? Cautiously, I moved closer, the rain masking the sound of my footsteps. The windows near the entrance were shattered, and inside, a single flickering light fought a losing battle against the shadows. I stepped over shards of broken glass, trying to keep my boots from crunching too loudly. Heidi. I called out softly, my voice barely audible over the downpour. The tables and chairs on the far side of the diner seemed untouched, but the counter near the front told a much darker story. I crept around the edge of what was left of the counter and froze. The mangled remains of a body lay there, missing its arms, legs, and head, just like the poachers I'd seen earlier. A bloodied name tag pinned to the tattered uniform read Heidi. I turned away, bile rising in my throat. Damn it, I whimpered under my breath, my voice breaking. I backed into a corner, my chest heaving as I tried to hold it together. My hands gripped my head as I fought against the crushing weight of reality. This had to be some sort of sick nightmare. Maybe Mom was right, maybe I'd watched too much TV, and my brain had cooked up this twisted horror. But no, the pain in my body and the freezing cold biting at me made it painfully clear, this was real, and it was worse than anything I'd ever imagined. I needed to get home. Focus. I had to keep moving, but first, I needed help. My eyes fell on a landline phone lying on the ground, knocked off its base. I snatched it up and punched in 911. We're sorry, the number you're trying to reach, the phone lines were down. Before I could process that, a soul-wrenching roar shattered the silence, a bone-chilling mix of animalistic howls and human-like screams. I ducked down, peeking over the counter just in time to see a massive, four-legged creature dart across the road outside. It moved too fast for me to get a good look, but its silhouette was wrong, grotesque and unnatural. Damn it! I hissed, my voice trembling as I scrambled to my feet. I flipped the light switch above me, plunging the diner into darkness. On my hands and knees, I crept toward the kitchen door. The air hit me like a brick wall the moment I entered, thick with the stench of rotting eggs. A gas pipe must have burst somewhere. I scanned the room, fryers, stoves, shelves, a storage closet. And then I heard it. The creature had followed me inside. It let out a low, guttural grunt, a grotesque imitation of a woman's dying scream. My heart nearly stopped as I slipped into the storage closet as quietly as I could. "Hello." A voice called out, raspy and broken. It was unmistakably Heidi's voice, or at least, something trying its damnedest to mimic her. But it sounded wrong. So very wrong. "Is somebody there?" Buck didn't dare close the storage closet door all the way, he was too afraid the latch might make a noise. His head was swimming, the thick stench of gas in the air making him woozy. Through the small crack in the door, he saw the fluorescent kitchen light flicker on. Something opened the order window, and a grotesque, glistening appendage snaked its way through. Blood dripped steadily from the thing, pooling on the floor. At the end of the appendage was a head tangled with blood-soaked hair that twitched unnaturally. Buck's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the face. It was Heidi. Oh, God, it was Heidi. Her head hung grotesquely at the end of the slithering tendril, her face slack and pale. Blood streaked her features, and her eyes moved, scanning the room with a disjointed awareness. A grimace twisted her mouth, and from the stump of her neck, a slick, meaty tendril of exposed muscle pulsed with life. The stench that accompanied it, like rotting garbage left in the blazing sun, assaulted Buck's senses, making his stomach churn violently. Her lips moved as if rehearsing words, soundlessly at first. Then her mouth formed a chillingly familiar phrase. "Hello." The voice was Heidi's, or at least a vile attempt to mimic it. The sound was raspy and mechanical, as if it came from something trying desperately to imitate humanity for the first time. Before Buck could react, the distant wail of a police siren shattered the silence. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, its mouth twisting into a snarl before it whipped its grotesque body out of the order window, retreating into the storm. Its unholy howl echoed into the night as it raced toward the approaching siren. Buck exhaled sharply, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. He pushed the closet door open and peered out cautiously. His pulse pounded in his ears as he made his way to the front of the diner. It had to be Officer Harris. His dad was out of town, and the sheriff was too old to bother with late-night calls anymore. Every instinct screamed at Buck to run, to use the distraction to save himself. But if he did, Harris was dead meat, and that would be on Buck. Grinding his teeth, Buck surveyed the room. The smell of gas was overwhelming now, and an idea formed in his mind. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only one he had. Buck slammed the metal shutter on the order window closed and made his way to the back of the kitchen. He yanked a sheet of newspaper from a nearby counter, rolled it up, and shoved it into the toaster slot. His head felt light, and his vision swam as the fumes thickened around him. His hand trembled as he pressed the lever down. He had seconds, maybe. Gunshots rang out in the distance, followed by a guttural roar that made his chest tighten. His legs felt like jelly as he ran toward the front of the diner. The flashing lights of the squad car illuminated the creature, which had slammed itself into the side of the vehicle with terrifying force. Buck grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it as hard as he could. "Hey! Over here," he shouted, his voice raw. The creature turned toward him, its monstrous figure half obscured by the cop car's high beams. Buck grabbed another rock and flung it. "Yeah, you. Come and get me, you ugly bastard." That did it. The creature reared up, standing on its hind legs, towering at least 15 feet tall. Its roar was a cacophony of agony, fury, and unearthly rage. Buck bolted back into the diner, slamming the kitchen door behind him. He turned just in time to see the monster barreling after him. "Shit," he cried, slamming the toaster lever down as he sprinted for the back door. He dove outside, rain-soaked and gasping for air. Behind him, the creature slammed into the diner's wall with an earth-shaking crash. "Please work. Please, God, let this work," Buck whispered, his voice breaking as he stumbled away. The explosion came less than 5 seconds later. A blinding flash of white light swallowed the night, throwing Buck face-first into the mud. The deafening roar of the blast left his ears ringing. When he turned to look, the diner was gone, obliterated. The monster was gone too. Buck tried to catch his breath as the ringing in his ears faded. His heart sank as he remembered Officer Harris. He staggered to the squad car, still illuminated by the flickering lights. The windshield was shattered, and Harris was slumped over the wheel. Buck peered inside and froze. Harris's face was mangled, caved in as if something massive had struck him. He was dead. Buck's knees nearly gave out, but he forced himself to keep moving. He had to get home. The rain had stopped by the time Buck spotted a bike abandoned on the side of the road. He recognized it. It belonged to someone in town, but right now, he didn't care. He climbed on and pedaled through the darkness, his clothes soaked and his mind racing. When he reached his house, his hands trembled as he unlocked the door. "Mom," his sister called from upstairs. The sound of her voice broke him. Buck collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. His sister came down the stairs, stopping dead when she saw him. "Oh my God, what happened to you?" she whispered. Buck peeled off his soaked coat and boots, wiping at his eyes. "I don't know," he said, his voice raw. "I'll explain in the morning." A loud knock at the door shattered the moment. Buck froze, holding up a hand to silence his sister. The foul stench of decay wafted through the air, making his stomach turn. A voice, soft and familiar, called out. "Buck? Is that you?" It was his mother's voice. But it wasn't his mother.